Hello everyone, my name is Juan Casas Doza, and today I'll be presenting on walkability and public transportation in West Virginia. My target audience for this presentation is city planners and infrastructure developers across the state with the goal of influencing future decisions toward building a more walkable and accessible West Virginia. My goals with this presentation are to first acknowledge the current limitations by examining the unique characteristics and barriers that West Virginia faces when trying to develop a more walkable and transit friendly city. Then I'll explore the potential benefits of walkable and transit friendly cities, such as improvements in community health, boosts to the local economy, and a higher quality of life. Finally, I'll discuss potential solutions to help develop West Virginia into a more walkable and transit friendly state. My inspiration for this presentation is personal. Growing up in West Virginia, I've struggled with transportation for most of my life, especially in my town where I had to walk along roads with no sidewalks on the shoulders. I didn't feel safe. Cars would speed past me and it felt dangerous every single time. To me, this isn't just a safety issue, it feels like it is an attack on lower income people. It is unfair when many people can't afford cars, and without sidewalks or public transportation, it's extremely difficult to get to work, go to the doctors, or even buy groceries. I feel that these basic needs shouldn't be so hard to reach. Although this is my personal take on the matter, what do West Virginians as a whole think about a more walkable and transit friendly state? Well, the West Virginia Department of Transportation conducted a survey, and 89% of respondents reported the lack of sidewalks as a major safety concern. This suggests there is a strong demand for better walkability in West Virginia communities. The survey also highlighted a significant demand for reliable public transit and safer walking options, especially in rural areas. Now that we know West Virginians truly want more walkable and transit friendly communities, let's take a look at some of the challenges the state will face in trying to implement these ideas. One of the challenges West Virginia will face when trying to implement walkable and transit friendly ideas is our strong reliance on cars. Although most West Virginians say they want safer, more walkable communities, it's important to recognize that many are currently dependent on cars, and often not by choice. As you can see from the bar graph on the right, West Virginia has a slightly higher percentage of households with vehicles compared to the national average, suggesting a greater reliance on personal transportation. In many areas, driving is simply the most practical or the only option available. That's why improving infrastructure and expanding reliable public transit is so important. It gives people real alternatives and helps build safer, more connected communities. Another major challenge in making West Virginia more walkable and transit friendly is the rural nature of our state. About two-thirds of West Virginians live in rural areas, where the population is more spread out. This low population density makes it much more difficult to implement effective public transportation systems and walkable infrastructure. However, this doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means we need creative, community specific solutions that work for both rural and urban areas. Now that we understand some of the challenges, let's take a look at some of the most and least walkable cities in West Virginia. First, it's important to mention that walkability is not always easy to measure. Different organizations use different criteria. For this slide, I use data from walkscore.com, which defines walkability by asking a simple question: how close am I to daily necessities like grocery stores, work, and schools? And do I need a car to get there? As you can see in the bar graph on the right, Morgantown ranks the highest in walkability with a score out of 100, while Weirton ranks the lowest. Interestingly, even though Charleston has a relatively high population, its walkability score is still quite low. This highlights that walkability doesn't always correlate with population size. It depends more on the city planning and infrastructure. Moving forward, I'll be using the EPA's Walkability Index to present data in the next few graphs. It's important to note that the EPA's Walkability Index doesn't just measure how walkable an area is based on sidewalks or housing density. It also considers access to public transit, such as bus stops and train stations. So when I refer to a place as being walkable using this score, it also includes both walkability and transit accessibility. Now let's take a look at some of the benefits that walkable and transit-friendly counties provide. One major benefit of walkable communities is a reduction in obesity rates. If you look at the graph on the left, which shows walkability and obesity rates across US counties, you'll notice a clear trend. As walkability increases, obesity rates tend to decrease. The same pattern is visible in the graph on the right, which focuses specifically on West Virginia counties. Higher walkability is associated with lower obesity rates. This makes sense. When a place is more walkable, it encourages people to leave their homes, move around, and stay active, just by going about their day. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to highlight something that is very interesting from a set of data that I collected from the CDC Places County data. And that is that West Virginia, out of all 50 states in the United States, has the highest depression rate. And I believe that it is our duty to do everything that we can to combat this characteristic of West Virginia. Although increasing walkability in West Virginia doesn't resolve depression, I believe it can help. As you can see from the graphs from both all US counties and West Virginia counties, as walkability increases, the depression rate decreases. This could be due to several factors. In more walkable areas, people are more likely to interact with others, spend time outside, and have easier access to daily necessities, all of which can reduce stress and feelings of isolation. Another benefit is that an increase in walkability also increases employment opportunities. As you can see from both graphs for all US counties and West Virginia counties, that as walkability increases, the percent of people employed also increase. And this makes sense because as an area becomes more walkable, people will tend to place more businesses there and therefore opportunity for employment increases. Another benefit of increased walkability is the rise in the number of establishments. As shown in both graphs, for US counties and West Virginia counties, areas with higher walkability tend to have more business establishments. This suggests that walkable communities are more attractive for starting and sustaining businesses. Another benefit of walkability is an increase in income for workers. As shown in the graphs below, average payroll per worker rises as walkability increases, both across US counties and within West Virginia. However, it's worth noting that West Virginia does not have any counties classified as having high or very high walkability. Now let's take a moment to consider some important factors we need to be mindful of as we evaluate and promote walkability. One important consideration is that higher income individuals tend to live in more walkable areas. As shown in the graphs for both US and West Virginia counties, the percentage of people with higher wage jobs increases alongside walkability. This suggests that more walkable areas may also be more expensive to live in, potentially limiting access for lower income residents. Another important consideration is the relationship between walkability and car ownership. As shown in the graphs below, from low to moderate walkability, car ownership actually increases in both US and West Virginia counties. However, in US counties, car ownership begins to decrease from moderate to very high walkability, suggesting that beyond a certain level of walkability, people rely less on cars. In contrast, West Virginia does not currently have any counties classified as high or very high in walkability. Therefore, we can't definitively predict the trend. However, based on national patterns, it's reasonable to expect that if walkability were improved further in West Virginia, car ownership might eventually begin to decline as well. Now, I'd like to share some recommendations on how we can improve walkability, and public transportation across West Virginia. One recommendation is to implement more rural bus routes in West Virginia. Because the state's population is widely spread out, having structured bus routes with scheduled pickup times running once or twice a day would be ideal. These buses could help residents reach essential places like grocery stores, workplaces, and medical facilities, improving access and reducing the need for personal vehicles. Another recommendation is to develop more park and ride facilities across West Virginia. Since the state is largely rural, residents could drive to a designated parking lot and then take a bus or train into the city. This will help reduce traffic congestion in downtown areas like Charleston or Morgantown, making them more walkable and less dependent on cars within city limits. Another recommendation I have is that we improve our already existing railroads, which are mostly used for cargo in West Virginia. We could start by adding more passenger trains and building additional train stations along the existing rail lines. That way, people who live in different parts of the state could drive to the nearest station, hop on the train, and travel to wherever they need to go. It's a practical way to make use of what we already have and give people more transportation options across the state. So, in conclusion, West Virginia has a lot of rural areas, which makes walking and taking the bus harder. But people want safer sidewalks and public transportation. And I believe if we improve on implementing more buses in rural areas, adding park and ride locations, and using old railroads better, then people can get to their necessities. We don't have to use as many cars, and communities will be healthier and happier. Making cities and towns easier to walk in helps everyone live a better life. And thank you to everyone for listening to my presentation. Have a great day.